Hey, you ever feel like there's more to really knowing a language than just words and grammar rules?
Oh, absolutely. You're spot on.
Well, today on the deep dive, we're unlocking the secrets of communicative competence.
Yeah, basically what it means to use a language effectively, like in real life.
Think of this as your fast track, sort of, to grasping what it really takes.
Exactly. We've gathered some fascinating material that traces how this whole idea has evolved,
Yeah.
from early linguistic theories
Right, the groundwork.
right up to how we understand communication and learning today. It's quite a journey, actually.
And honestly, get ready for some light bulb moments as we explore these ideas and see how they build on each other. Okay, so to get started, where did this whole concept even spring from?
It really kicks off with Noam Chomsky. You have to start there. He introduced these key concepts: linguistic competence and linguistic performance.
Competence and performance. Okay.
Yeah, and the crucial thing Chomsky highlighted was the difference between our sort of ideal, perfect internal knowledge of a language's grammar.
That's competence.
That's linguistic competence, yes.
Yeah.
And then there's how we actually use language in real situations, which is often, messy, full of errors, hesitations.
That sounds more familiar.
Right. That's linguistic performance.
So Chomsky was really zeroing in on that perfect blueprint in our heads, the ideal version.
Pretty much.
Hmm.
He famously talked about linguistics being concerned primarily with an ideal speaker-listener who knows its language perfectly.
An ideal speaker listener.
Yeah, for Chomsky, the main job of linguistics was to study this underlying system, this grammatical knowledge. He felt that actual language use, performance, was affected by all sorts of other factors.
Like forgetting what you were saying or getting distracted.
Exactly. Memory limits, distractions, slips of the tongue.
Hmm.
He saw those as less central to understanding language itself.
Okay, I can sort of see it like knowing the rules of chess versus actually playing a game under pressure.
That's a really good analogy. The underlying knowledge was primary for him. But this idea of a perfect speaker in a totally uniform language community.
It sounds a bit unrealistic.
Well, that was the criticism. It didn't sit well with everyone because, as you say, our communication is anything but perfect or uniform.
Right. It's messy and depends hugely on who you're talking to.
Precisely. Critics argued his model gave this idealized picture that didn't really match how language actually functions in the world. They felt he was ignoring the vital social and cultural parts of language.
Can maybe the whole point of why we talk in the first place.
Exactly. The purpose of communication. It's fundamentally social. It's spontaneous, creative, heavily context-dependent who we're talking to, our goals, their reactions.
Yeah, whether you actually get your message across and achieve what you wanted.
Right. The success is judged by the outcome, the
Yeah.
result. Communication is about, the exchange and negotiation of information, using words, yes, but also nonverbal stuff.
So I could make a perfectly grammatical sentence that's just totally wrong for the situation or confusing. Is that really being competent?
That's the big question Chomsky's work raised.
Yeah.
He gave us that foundation about grammatical knowledge, but it became clear there was a much bigger picture. It's not just about correct sentences.
Okay, so Chomsky sets the stage, but then Del Hymes comes along and sort of expands the view with communicative competence. What was his big idea?
Hymes built directly on Chomsky, but he argued pretty forcefully that just knowing grammar isn't enough. His major contribution was introducing the concept of rules of use.
Rules of use.
Yeah. Communicative competence, for Hymes, means knowing not just the grammar, but also when to say what, how to say it, and to whom. Appropriateness is key.
Ah, okay, that makes immediate sense. Knowing when to be formal, when to joke around.
Exactly that. Language is a social tool, and using it well means understanding the social rules. Hymes had this great example.
Yeah.
He said, imagine a child who could technically produce any grammatically correct sentence, but had no sense of social context. Their speech would seem incredibly odd, maybe even disturbing.
You mean like blurting out secrets or asking deeply personal questions to strangers?
Something like that. A typical child, Hymes said, learns not only what's grammatical, but also what's appropriate. They develop a repertoire of speech acts.
Speech acts. Like knowing how to request something politely versus demanding it, or how to apologize properly.
Precisely. Knowing how to do things with words. So Hymes saw Chomsky's linguistic competence as just one piece of the puzzle, a subdivision of the larger communicative competence.
And this bigger competence includes more than just words.
Definitely. Gestures, tone of voice, facial expressions, it all plays a part. He even pointed to bilinguals who naturally switch languages depending on the context, like who they're talking to or where they are. That shows this deep awareness of rules of use.
So Himes really hammered home that language has a purpose, a function. It's a tool for interaction.
Absolutely. The utility of language. And that ties back to the Speech Act idea. When we speak, we're performing actions, trying to produce effects. Himes actually broke down communicative competence into four main aspects.
Okay, what are...
First, there's systematic potential. This is pretty close to Chomsky's competence, basically, or underlying capacity to create language.
Right, the raw ability. Got it.
Second is appropriacy. This is the big one Himes added, knowing what language fits a situation. A linguist named Yalden later detailed this with like 13 different appropriacy variables.
13. Wow, like what?
Things like the participants, the relationship, the setting, the topic, the purpose of the interaction, the tone or key, even the channel, like speaking versus writing.
That's a lot to juggle subconsciously.
It really is. It shows how complex appropriateness is. The third aspect Himes identified is occurrence. This is about knowing how frequently something is actually said.
You mean even if it's grammatically okay, people just don't say it that way?
Exactly. Think of really awkward passive sentences in English, or maybe that Spanish example often cited, La manzana es comida por mí.
Grammatically possible.
I know.
Yes. Commonly said. Almost never. You just say, como la manzana.
Okay, so knowing what sounds natural. And the fourth. The fourth is feasibility. This relates to what's actually processable or possible in practice, even if grammar rules don't strictly forbid it. Like trying to stack up 10 adjectives before a noun.
Yeah, your brain kind of short circuits trying to follow that.
Right. It becomes unwieldy, unnatural. So Himes fundamentally shifted the focus from just, is it correct, to, is it appropriate, is it feasible, is it actually done?
That feels like a much more complete picture of knowing a language, a huge difference from just grammar rules.
It absolutely was. He argued language isn't just about form and meaning. It's woven into our social lives, our communicative conduct. And this really opened the door for others to map out the components of communicative competence in even more detail.
Right, so Hines provides this broader framework, and then others started trying to pin down the specific ingredients, you could say. Where did the research go from there?
Exactly. Himes's ideas were super influential. In the early 80s, Canale and Swain took up the challenge. Their initial key contribution was clarifying that communicative competence really does have to include grammatical competence alongside the ability to use language appropriately.
So they were pushing back against maybe separating grammar too much.
Yeah, they argued you can't really have communicative competence without grammatical competence. It's foundational. Initially, they proposed just two main parts: grammatical competence, the nuts and bolts, vocab, pronunciation, and sociolinguistic competence, knowing the social rules of use.
Okay, grammar and social rules. Seems straightforward.
It was a start, but then just a few years later, in 1983, Canale himself expanded it into a four-part model.
Ah, okay. It got more complex. What did he add?
He kept grammatical competence and sociolinguistic competence, but added two more: discourse competence and strategic competence.
Discourse and strategic. What do those cover?
Discourse competence is about how we string language together coherently and cohesively. Think about telling a story logically, or constructing a clear argument, or even just participating smoothly in a conversation. It's about the flow and structure beyond single sentences.
Making sense over longer stretches of talk or writing. Got it. And strategic.
Strategic competence is all about how we manage communication. It's the ability to use strategies to make communication more effective, or crucially, to compensate when communication breaks down.
Like what? Asking for clarification.
Exactly. Or rephrasing something if you can't find the exact word, using gestures, guessing meaning from context. Basically, keeping the conversation going and achieving your goal even when you hit a snag.
That sounds incredibly important for, actual messy conversations, like a communication toolkit.
It really is. It acknowledges that communication isn't always smooth. The big takeaway from Canale's model is seeing these different strands, grammar, social rules, discourse structure, and coping strategies all contributing to overall competence.
Did he explain how they all fit together?
That was one criticism, actually. The model laid out the components, but didn't explicitly describe how they dynamically interacted. It was more like a list of essential skills.
Okay, so the what, but not necessarily the how they connect.
Sort of. And that's where Sandra Savignon, also writing around 1983, offered a slightly different angle. She really emphasized the dynamic, interactive nature of it all.
Dynamic, how so?
Savignon's key insight was that communicative competence isn't just something inside one person's head, an intrapersonal thing. She argued it's fundamentally interpersonal.
Mm.
It emerges from the interaction between people as they negotiate meaning.
So it's co-created in the conversation.
Precisely. And because of that, she saw it as relative, not absolute. Your competence in a specific situation depends on the context, the topic, and crucially, the cooperation of the people you're talking to.
That's a real departure from Chomsky's absolute ideal competence.
Absolutely. She pointed out that even native speakers vary wildly in their communicative competence depending on the situation and who they're talking with.
That feels very true to life.
Right. And Savillon suggested that Canale's four components weren't just separate boxes, but were constantly interacting. Picture them all interconnected, influencing each other. The core idea is communication as a collaborative dance.
I like that. It takes two to tango, communicatively speaking.
Exactly. She also had an interesting idea about the components. She suggested that you could actually achieve basic communication using primarily sociolinguistic and strategic competence, even if your grammar wasn't strong yet.
Really? So social savvy and coping skills can get you quite far.
Potentially, yes, in
Yeah.
getting basic meaning across. And she theorized that as your other competencies, grammatical discourse, develop, your reliance on purely strategic competence might decrease.
Fascinating. So strategies are like scaffolding while you build the main structure.
That's a good way to put it. Okay, moving on slightly. In 1982, Diane Larson Freeman proposed her own model, this time with 5 components. Her contribution was digging even deeper into the specifics of the knowledge involved.
5 components now. What did she highlight?
Larson Freeman listed linguistic rules, and she included grammar, discourse structure, and even paralinguistic features like voice quality here, propositional content, the core meaning being conveyed, interactional patterns, the ways we manage turns and negotiate meaning, strategic competence, again, the coping mechanisms, and finally, functions or speech acts.
Functions and speech acts again. That links back to Himes, right?
Exactly. It brings in that whole idea that language is used to do things. This connects to philosophers of language like J.L. Austin and John Searle and their work on speech act theory.
Right, the idea that saying something is performing an action.
Precisely. Austin talked about how an utterance has a locutionary act, the literal meaning, an illocutionary act, the speaker's intention or force like warning, promising, requesting, and a perlocutionary act, the effect on the hearer.
So understanding the speaker's intent is crucial for competence.
Absolutely. And Searle built on this by categorizing the basic types of illocutionary acts or points. He identified 5 main ones.
Okay, what are they? Briefly.
Directives trying to get someone to do something. Example, close the door. Assertives stating a belief, e.g., it's raining. Commissives committing to future action. Example, I promise I'll be there. Declaratives changing the world through words, e.g., you're fired. And expressives showing feelings. Example, I'm sorry for your loss.
Wow. So being communicatively competent means understanding and using all those different intentions correctly.
That's a big part of it, according to this view. It's not just decoding sentences, it's understanding the underlying action being performed.
Okay, this is getting really layered.
Mhm.
What about Bachman and Palmer? They came up often in language testing discussions, I think.
Yes, exactly. Their work in the 80s and 90s was very influential, especially in assessment. Their key initial distinction was between operational competence, which covered the mechanics like grammar and text structure, and pragmatic competence, which dealt with understanding illocutionary force and context.
Operational and pragmatic. Okay.
Interestingly, their research found that grammatical skill and pragmatic skill understanding intent seemed quite closely linked. But sociolinguistic competence awareness of social conventions registers seemed a bit more distinct.
That's an interesting finding.
It is. Later, Bachman developed this broader framework called communicative language ability. This model explicitly tried to integrate both competence, knowledge, and performance use within specific contexts.
Bringing them back together.
Yes, largely driven by the practical needs of language testing. He argued that strategic competence should perhaps be seen as separate from language knowledge itself, because people with similar knowledge can have very different success rates in actually using the language, depending on their strategic skills.
That makes sense. You can know the grammar, but freeze up in conversation.
Right. So in his later model, Bachman essentially equated communicative competence with language competence, and then divided that into 2 main areas: organizational competence, covering grammar and text structure, and pragmatic competence.
And pragmatic competence covered.
That covered both illocutionary competence understanding and producing appropriate speech acts, and sociolinguistic competence sensitivity to things like dialect, register, politeness conventions, and generally sounding natural.
So again, breaking down the different kinds of knowing and doing involved.
Exactly. Then, fast forwarding slightly to 1984, we have Farish, Hostrup, and Philipson. Their work really highlighted the relevance of all this to language teaching.
Okay, bringing it into the classroom, what was their model?
They proposed 5 key components, again with a focus on what learners need. They listed linguistic competence, the core knowledge of form and meaning; pragmatic competence, using language to achieve goals and understanding appropriateness; discourse competence, cohesion and coherence; strategic competence, coping with problems.
Familiar territory so far.
But they added a 5th component, fluency.
Ah, fluency. That feels important, especially for learners.
Very much so. They defined it as the ability to link speech units together smoothly without undue pausing or hesitation. They saw it as distinct from strategic competence.
How so?
Fluency is about using the knowledge and skills you already have efficiently and automatically. Strategic competence is what you employ when you lack the necessary knowledge or skill and need to find a workaround.
That's a useful distinction. So fluency is about smooth delivery of what you know.
Exactly. And finally, just to bring it closer to a practical application, we can look at the perspective of, say, the Spanish Ministry of Education and Culture.
Okay, how do they frame it?
Well, they draw heavily on Canale's work and also the common European framework of reference for languages, which is widely used in Europe. Their approach really emphasizes putting competence into action.
Makes sense for education.
They identify 4 main subcompetences, very similar to Canale's: linguistic, pragmatic discourse, combining those; sociolinguistic, which includes sociocultural awareness; and strategic.
So pretty much covering the same bases we've discussed.
Largely, yes.
Ah.
But their key focus is on developing these competencies through practical communicative tasks related to different domains of life: public, personal, work, education.
Learning by doing, essentially.
Exactly. And they also frame language learning within broader educational goals: developing personality, fostering positive social attitudes, cultural understanding, tolerance, and enabling international communication.
So it connects language skill to becoming a more well-rounded, interculturally aware person.
That's the ultimate aim.
Wow. Okay, so we've journeyed from Chomsky's initial quite narrow focus on grammatical knowledge through Himes broadening it to social use, and then all these subsequent models trying to map out the different skills involved: discourse, strategy, pragmatics, fluency. It's quite an evolution.
It really is. And the consistent thread is this growing understanding that truly knowing a language goes way beyond just the dictionary definitions and grammar rules. It's about using it effectively, appropriately, and strategically in real, complex social situations.
It certainly makes you think differently about what it means to communicate well, even in your native language. All these layers are constantly at play.
Absolutely. It's a dynamic process involving knowledge, skill, context, and interaction.
So a final thought for our listeners. Thinking about everything we've discussed, how might our understanding of communicative competence need to evolve further, especially in our super-connected digital world? What aspects of communication, maybe beyond what these models emphasize, do you think are most crucial today?
Definitely something to mull over.
That's a great question to leave people with. And if this deep dive has sparked your interest, exploring the original writings of Himes, Canale, Savignol, and others can offer even richer perspectives.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for navigating us through that fascinating history.
My pleasure. It's a core concept for understanding language use.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us on this deep dive.